My name is Dimitri Martinovich, and you're watching RPTV. Today we will be speaking with Wayne Lewchuck, who was one of the authors of a report on the Ontario Basic Income Pilot, which was initiated by the previous Kathleen Wynn government in 2017 and then cancelled by the present Conservative government of Doug Ford in 2018. The basic income could play a significant role in alleviating the effects of income inequality, housing instability, and in the long term enhance health and well-being. The Ontario Basic Income Pilot sought to test how a basic income might help people on low incomes better meet their basic needs while improving outcomes in food security, stress and anxiety, mental health, housing stability, education and training, employment, and labor market participation. The Basic Income Pilot was comprised of participants from 18 to 63 years of age. Additionally, participants had to be living in one of the selected test regions for the past at least 12 months or longer: Hamilton, Brantford, Brant County, Lindsay, and Thunder Bay, and to be living on low income under $34,000 per year if you're single, and under $48,000 per year for a couple. Welcome, Wayne, to RPTV. And before we begin to speak about the basic income and the report that you wrote, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a professor emeritus at McMaster University in the School of Labor Studies and Department of Economics. And I was lucky enough to have retired September 1st, so I'm on what's called a retirement basic income. It's very reassuring in a period like this.
And so can you now briefly explain to us what is the concept behind the basic income?
The concept is to put money into people's pockets or into households, and it comes as a form of a grant, basically no strings attached, and depending on how it's set up, normally it would be taxable income. And it's designed to keep households afloat. And in many ways, it's exactly what the Government of Canada enacted yesterday in terms of Canada Emergency Benefit, which is going to put $2,000 into people's pockets, basically no questions asked.
So why is the basic income become, in the spotlight again, considering COVID-19?
I think what we've seen is that the Canadian social welfare system has tremendous gaps, and those gaps are growing as a result of changes in the nature of the labor market. So in particular, what we've come to understand is that the unemployment system is very spotty in terms of providing coverage to people who are laid off or are unable to work because they're in quarantine. And so maybe only a third of people on unemployment insurance qualify, have a number of hours, et cetera, that is needed to get the benefit. And a lot of Canadians don't even qualify for unemployment insurance. So people in the gig economy, the self-employed, they're not even part of the unemployment insurance scheme, and therefore that's not a mechanism for getting money into people's pockets. On the other hand, our social welfare, such as in Ontario ODSP, it's a very long and drawn out process, and it's not really designed for this sort of a situation. So for instance, in order to be on ODSP, you have to be disabled. Well, being unemployed is not a qualification for being disabled. So what we're seeing is a real need to kind of fill in these gaps, as literally millions of Canadians are suddenly without income from employment.
Yes, and like Ontario Works, social assistance requires you that you kind of get rid of everything. If you have anything in the bank, you can't have any of those things around you and qualify for that.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think it's widely recognized that our social welfare system as it's set up has real problems. I think, as you pointed out, the Ontario Works, in the sense, impoverishes people before they qualify. But even ODSP, it's a very uncertain kind of a program. It's fraught with bureaucratic requirements, reporting. If you have any income, you're reporting every week. If you stop reporting, you could get dropped off, and it could take months to get back on. And so it's a very administratively heavy program. And the idea of basic income is you wash away all of those bureaucratic requirements, and you simply give people money. And if they are lucky enough to have found a job and received employment, well, you tax the benefit back.
Do you foresee someday in the future when the basic income becomes a more permanent fixture in our society?
Well, I would be very surprised if it didn't. And I think what we're going through right now is a bit of a wake-up call of how many people really are vulnerable in the economy. And so while during this particular period we are talking about millions of people who are now in the situation of not having an alternative source of income and for whom the existing social assistance doesn't work, on a day-to-day basis, we're seeing this all the time, even in normal times. People who are self-employed gig workers, a group that's growing, are in these kind of vulnerable situations. So I think it's inevitable that something is going to happen. And certainly what our research has shown very clearly is that there are real health implications and social implications of not being able to provide a floor for every Canadian below which they cannot fall. And I think that's where basic income will come in.
Mm-hmm. So in your report, and then the project that was initiated by the Liberal government before the Ford government cut it short, can you speak a little bit about why you and the other authors felt the report had to be put together after the project was canceled?
The pilot itself was really a very large social experiment, and part of the motivation was to evaluate the effectiveness of a basic income program. And I was certainly part of the evaluation panel that was hired by the ministry to do that evaluation. I was in charge of the labor market component of the study. We had probably 20 different researchers involved, and we would have learned an awful lot about how basic income affects the people who are on it, but also the communities in which those people live. When the pilot was canceled, that evaluation was ended. And in fact, it was ended before any data was made available that we could begin evaluating even the first 18 months of the experiment. So we had absolutely no data. And so living in Hamilton and having some very keen graduate students who kept hounding me saying, we need to do something, because you heard a lot of anecdotal stories in the community, because there were 1,000 people in Hamilton who were on this program. We felt it was necessary to try and capture some of that data so that the experiment wasn't completely wasted. And so that's why we went ahead and we started interviewing people with the help of the Hamilton Poverty Roundtable, and set up an online survey for people on basic income to try and get a more formal understanding of what their experience was.
And how long did it take you to create the report?
Well, we were probably in the field doing interviews and surveys for about 3 months, and then we spent a couple months after that putting it together and releasing it last month.
And so far, because it's just been released, what has been the response?
Well, there's certainly a lot of interest. I've been doing a number of TV and radio spots on it. We've had lots of people downloading it from the Labor Studies website, and to be frank, it's been a bit swallowed up by the COVID-19 crisis that we're in right now. Everything is swallowed up by that. But once this passes, we will see what further interest there is in it.
So one of the problems with the social safety net and all of the social programs that come with that is that there's one segment of the society that argues against that, that says, you know, if you're not working, you're shirking. How can we get free of that attitude?
Well, I think there's sort of two components to that question. One is if you're not working, you must be shirking with your feet up watching the Maple Leafs or something. And I think what that does is it devalues things that people do that you don't necessarily get income for, taking care of people, helping in our community, volunteering, etc. These are all necessary services that don't necessarily come with pay. But I think that there's also this deeper idea that somehow if you give people money for nothing, they will just stay at home and watch the Maple Leafs and not try and work. And I think that's, to be frank, quite a mean-spirited interpretation of humans, and certainly not what we found in our report about what people do. They don't stay home and just do nothing when they get a little bit of money. They continue working.
So I want to go back to a little bit of some history, back to the year 1795, when in a town, a village in England called Speamhamland, when there was a great social upheaval happening and a demand for some sort of organized solution, so they brought in certain measures about trying to make things more equal for the people who had been displaced and put into hardship. But the problems that remain from that kind of intervention are still with us. We are having upheaval of a kind today, and still society is uncertain about taking these kinds of measures. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are. There are two current dilemmas, and I think one is that we have a market economy where people sell their labor, and for the most part, employers won't buy that labor unless they think they can get some production from it. And the reality is not everyone is equally able to be productive. There are some people, for a variety of reasons, sickness, mental illness, etc., whose ability to produce is compromised, and they don't do very well in a market economy. And so that's why we have some kind of a social welfare system to support those people, because we do believe that we shouldn't just allow people to starve. But I think the more pressing contemporary problem is we increasingly have an economy where people's employment situation is quite insecure. And so their income is going up and down, up and down. And I think what we need is something that takes away some of the uncertainty of not knowing, will I have a job next week? Will I have it next month? How much will it pay? Therefore, will I be able to pay my mortgage? We need something that prevents people from, in those kinds of situations, from falling below a certain minimum and not being able to sustain their households. So for people with permanent jobs, full-time, full-year jobs with benefits, they don't need these kind of programs. For the gig, the Uber drivers, the part-time workers, they do need this kind of a program to smooth things out. And so I think that's what we need. We need to introduce some stability in people's lives, and basic income has that potential. For me and a lot of people, capitalism is the elephant in the room. As an economic historian, can you speak to that a little bit? I think if you're objective about capitalism, number one, it produces a lot of stuff. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Not always the stuff that we would like, but it produces a lot of stuff. I think one of its problems is it doesn't distribute that stuff very equitably. I think right now capitalism is in a bit of a dilemma, because over the last 30 years, what we've seen is a tremendous increase in inequality, certainly within countries. less so between countries, because some countries now are catching up. You think of what's happened in China. It's much closer to where the United States was than it was 35 or 40 years ago. But even within those countries, there's still incredible disparity. And even China, there are billionaires and there are people in poverty. And I think that is that in some ways that's the Achilles heel, I think, of capitalism. Its inability to fairly share the benefits that it provides.
Okay, so that seems to, we've covered most of the questions that I wanted to ask, and I think we have an interesting perspective on the basic income, since you were one of the authors of it. Is there anything else that you feel that you'd like to say about this?
Yeah, I think one thing that our report showed, and it was somewhat surprising, is everybody benefited. Everyone was better off health-wise, outlook on life, whether you were on ODSP before the pilot or working before the pilot. I don't think that's surprising. What did surprise us is the people who gained the most were not the people on ODSP who got a little bit more money. It was actually the people who were working in various kinds of precarious jobs before the pilot. So it's those people who were working through temp agencies, who were self-employed in the gig economy. They were the ones who reported the biggest gains in mental health, physical health, outlook on life. And I think, and they kept working. They didn't stop working. Most of them kept working. And I think what we really saw is the social benefit of providing a floor below which people could not fall. So people in these kinds of jobs, they have a very precarious life. Sometimes they have income, sometimes they don't. What the basic income did is it held them to at least a minimum below which they couldn't fall. And one of the knock-on effects of that is it allowed people to be a little bit more selective in terms of which jobs they took. So we saw about a third of our sample move to jobs that paid better. They moved to jobs that were more secure. We saw people going back to school. One would assume to acquire skills so they could re-enter the labor market at a later date at a higher level. And so in many ways, the basic income pilot, while certainly it was beneficial as a social welfare program, in many ways it was an employment policy. It was a policy that allowed people who could work to fully realize their potential in the labor market. And I think that's an important perspective on basic income that's not always brought out, but I think is actually quite important. And it's very much consistent with the kind of labor market we're seeing develop over the last 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, so like these points that you're making now are very interesting, because initially those were the sort of pillars of the basic income when they were first talking about it, that people would be free to do things, or freer to do things that they like. But that's changed so much now. What we have is a society where people have some sort of jobs, but not enough to really keep them going. So now the whole basic income shifts a little bit and becomes, as you were saying, as a tool for making society a little bit more equitable.
So, I think you're right. People, would like to do what they like to do. And in some cases that could be non-income activities, volunteering, taking care of people. But I think the reality is what most people like to do is they like to work.
They do.
And earn an income and raise their standard of living. And I think what basic income did is it allowed people to be better at that than they are in a labor market where there are so many holes in the system that they could fall through, that they're stressed. Their mental health is compromised. There's tension in the household because they don't know if they're going to be maintained, keep their household, pay their rent, do their mortgage. Basic income kind of eased all of those worries and allowed people to actually do a better job of what they like, which is working.
Well, yeah, and also your personal well-being and happiness become enhanced. Working gives people an identity and a purpose. So people, as you said, want to keep working. They want to be participating because it creates and maintains their identity and their well-being.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think The reality is a lot of people who are forced into short-term jobs, these are not necessarily jobs they like, but they have to do them in order to put food on the table. And they're probably not fully realizing their potential. And I think as a society, what we want to allow people to do is fully realize their potential, to really do things that add the most to our collective social welfare. And I think basic income can actually help people do that, which makes it better for everybody, not just those who receive basic income, but those who live in our community.
Thank you, Wayne. That was extremely informative and pertinent to the present situation we find ourselves in with COVID-19 and the effect that it's having on all of our lives. A basic income may become more of a permanent fixture as precarity in the global situation threatens the livelihoods of more and more people. My name is Dimitria Martinovic. This is RPTV. And join us as we continue to bring you stories and issues of critical importance to our communities.
Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. For more information, follow us on all our social media platforms. And don't forget to visit our website, as well as comment down below what you thought about this video.